The opening mystery. Imagine a continent where the wealthiest individual in human history once lived, Mansa Musa of Mali, whose 14th century pilgrimage to Mecca was so extravagant it destabilized Mediterranean gold markets for a decade. This same landmass holds 30% of global mineral reserves, gold, diamonds, oil, and rare earth elements worth trillions. Yet today, 70% of the world's poorest nations call Africa home. This jarring contradiction isn't coincidence. It's the result of 5 centuries of systematic wealth extraction that continues reverberating through African economies today. Pre-colonial Africa defied European stereotypes of primitive societies. The Kingdom of Kush dominated lucrative trade routes for millennia, perfecting iron smelting techniques centuries before Europe. Timbuktu's University of Sankore housed 700,000 manuscripts when European libraries were burning books. Great Zimbabwe's stone architecture rivaled medieval European castles, while Swahili coastal cities formed cosmopolitan trading networks connecting 3 continents. European explorers didn't discover empty wilderness. They encountered sophisticated civilizations. Portuguese visitors to the Kingdom of Congo in 1482 found a functioning state with parliamentary systems, provinces, and established currency. Dutch settlers at the Cape in 1652 met Khoi pastoralists with complex social structures and sustainable land management. Yet colonial narratives deliberately erased this history, portraying Africa as a blank slate awaiting European civilization, a fiction that justified subsequent exploitation. The transatlantic slave trade wasn't merely moral catastrophe, it was calculated economic warfare. Between 1500 to 1866, 12.5 million Africans were forcibly transported to the Americas, but historians estimate 5 others died for every person enslaved. This systematic depopulation targeted Africa's most productive demographics: youth, skilled workers, and innovators. The mathematical devastation is staggering. Had Africa maintained its 16th century growth rate without the slave trade, the continent would have had 100 million more people by 1850. These weren't statistics. They were farmers, artisans, and traders whose forced removal collapsed entire economies. The Yoruba kingdoms, once manufacturing centers producing textiles and metalwork, became hunting grounds for human cargo. Local industries crumbled as societies restructured around survival and defense against slave raiders. This period fundamentally reoriented African economies from internal development toward external extraction, creating dependency patterns that colonial powers would later exploit systematically. In 1884, 15 European men gathered in Berlin to reshape global economics. No Africans attended this conference where European powers divided Africa among themselves. This wasn't mere territorial ambition. It institutionalized extraction systems that persist today. Colonial borders deliberately divided ethnic groups while unifying traditional enemies, ensuring future instability. But the real genius lay in economic architecture. Hut taxes payable only in European currency forced Africans into wage labor for European companies. Colonial governments monopolized cash crop production, mandating that colonies sell raw materials to colonizers at fixed low prices while buying finished goods at inflated rates. The Belgian Congo exemplifies this systematic plunder. Under King Leopold II, 1885 to 1908, an estimated 10 million Congolese died in what scholars now recognize as genocide. The colony generated profits equivalent to $1.1 billion today. None remained in Congo. Instead, it financed Belgium's infrastructure, from Brussels boulevards to social security systems. This pattern repeated across Africa. Ghanaian gold built British wealth while Ghanaians remained impoverished. Senegalese groundnuts funded French development while Senegal stagnated. Political independence in the 1960s proved hollow when economic structures remained unchanged. France's France-Afrique system exemplifies neo-colonial control. 14 former colonies still use the CFA franc, controlled by the French treasury. These nations must deposit 50% of foreign reserves in French banks, accessible only with French approval, sovereignty in name alone. The World Bank and IMF, established when most African nations lacked representation, imposed structural adjustment programs in the 1980s. These required privatizing public services, eliminating trade barriers, and prioritizing debt repayment over domestic development. Results were predictable: collapsed health systems, evaporated education funding, and local industries unable to compete with subsidized imports. This wasn't aid, it was economic control under new guise. Africa's mineral wealth became a curse through persistent colonial extraction systems. The Democratic Republic of Congo produces 70% of global cobalt, essential for smartphones and electric cars, yet miners earn less than $2 daily while tech companies profit billions. This exemplifies modern extraction. Raw materials flow north while profits accumulate in Silicon Valley and Seoul. Oil-rich Nigeria demonstrates another dimension. Despite earning over $400 billion from oil since 1970, Nigeria has higher poverty rates than at independence. The problem isn't resource scarcity, but distribution systems inherited from colonial models, where wealth enriches foreign companies and local elites while bypassing ordinary citizens. Today's debt crisis has colonial roots. Many African nations inherited colonial debts for infrastructure that primarily served extraction industries. Current sub-Saharan African external debt exceeds $700 billion, often at interest rates making repayment impossible. Countries spend more servicing debt than on healthcare and education combined. China's Belt and Road Initiative presents new complexities. While providing needed infrastructure, several African nations face unsustainable debt relationships reminiscent of colonial dependence. Sri Lanka's loss of Hambantota port to China previews potential outcomes. Africa contributes less than 4% of global carbon emissions but faces the harshest climate impacts. Desertification threatens the Sahel, rising seas endanger coastal cities, and changing rainfall disrupts agriculture. This isn't coincidence. It's the culmination of centuries of environmental exploitation beginning with colonial plantation systems. The cruel irony: African nations need massive renewable energy and climate adaptation investments, but debt burdens and unfavorable trade relationships make such investments nearly impossible without creating new dependencies. They're trapped, historically exploited, currently suffering, financially constrained from building resilience. Understanding African poverty requires rejecting simplistic explanations about corruption or culture. The evidence reveals systematic extraction spanning 5 centuries, from slave raids through colonial exploitation to modern debt relationships. The same institutions built on African wealth now lecture African nations about governance while maintaining extractive structures. Yet history also reveals African resilience. Kenya pioneered mobile money revolution. Rwanda achieved remarkable development despite recent genocide. Botswana transformed from extreme poverty to upper-middle income status through strategic resource management. These examples prove progress is possible. The question isn't why Africa remains poor. The mechanisms are clear. It's whether the international community will address historical injustices through reparative policies, comprehensive debt cancellation, fair trade agreements, genuine technology transfer? Or will we continue pretending 5 centuries of systematic wealth extraction bears no relation to contemporary realities? Africa's poverty isn't mystery. It's manufactured outcome with identifiable causes and potential solutions. The question remaining is whether we have courage to confront this history and wisdom to forge an equitable future. Justice, not charity, must guide policy reform.